I want to ask you how the political echelon interacts with the military echelon, because there's been certain complaints or incidents in which the political class has accused Hagari of kind of crossing the line, and there obviously was conflict between some of the things that the politicians were saying and, for example, Herzl Levy. So what's the interaction like, and how is that coordinated between the political echelon and the IDF spokesperson's unit?
Yeah, so I wasn't really part of the coordination between the Prime Minister's office and Minister of Defense during Gallant and after he was fired and replaced by Minister Katz. I was more, focused on international media. But I'll say the following. I think you address, or you're putting your finger on a very important space in Israeli national security between the political and the military echelon. And I have a few things to say about it. One would be that I think we've seen different types of failure during this war. It started with the tremendous military failure that allowed Hamas to attack, murder, abduct, burn, etc., all of the horrible things that they did on October 7th. I think it has continued with a leadership failure in Israel to not only define these strategic goals that were more or less defined in the beginning, but then following up on that. I, as an Israeli, not as an officer and not as a civilian, I don't know what Israel's strategy is and what we're trying to achieve. I know what we don't want. If it is Gaza, we don't want Hamas, we don't want the PA, but then what do we want and what is our strategy and what is our aim? And what I hear from many politicians is a lot of slogans and a lot of sound bites that are intended for local media and political consumption. And what really bothers me is, again, this space between the higher echelons of the military and the political echelon, where I think that we have sold ourselves short on two fronts, is taking military achievements and then turning them into strategic benefits or a strategic long-term situation. In Lebanon, Israel, the IDF, achieved significant military achievements. We really delivered significant blows against Hezbollah, yet the diplomatic deal, the ceasefire that was brokered, doesn't really reflect that. And it doesn't really provide the security that Israeli civilians need, or the guarantees that an October 7 attack style won't happen again. And that is on the political echelon. And what I very much regret hearing is when there's, in the military, we call it when you're shooting inside the APC. It sounds more commonplace in Hebrew. Yorim betoch hanagmash, which means when there's friendly fire and where politicians, for whatever aims or purposes, decide to use the military, senior military, as props for their political endeavors. And I've seen a lot of examples of that during this war, and I think that's very regrettable. Hagari, sure, I think he has made two mistakes during these 15 months. Once when he answered a question, and 1 out of 4 questions in one of the updates that he gave, and he answered out of line and gave an opinion, which he probably shouldn't have been sharing. And one other time when there was tension between the Ministry of Defense and the IDF.
I want to add a third one. On
Yeah.
October 9th, 2023, when he said that there was enough equipment and that everyone had to be patient and the equipment was on the way. And he was completely wrong. And to this day, I have trouble trusting him personally because of it. But I think it leads to the question, though, about where the orders are coming from and what the audience is, right? Because it's not like and I think I heard you say this with Elon Levy, that who you're speaking to is far more complicated now in 2025 than it was 15, 20 years ago. Because I understand wanting to portray strength to our enemies, but internally, there is also an obligation about telling the truth. So that's also something that's a challenge.
Definitely. And listen, there are things, and on the 9th of October, the amount of disarray and I would say mayhem in Israel, if he said then that there's enough equipment, that was the information that he has available. You and I know that not to be the case. You definitely know, based on your extensive activity of good deeds. And again, just like Chezi Nechama thanked you, I think there's definitely room to thank you and everybody that has been working with you and donating through you to IDF soldiers. I think it's tremendous. And I am ashamed that it is needed. It's a very odd situation to be in, to be overwhelmed with gratefulness, but also to be very ashamed that we need it. But I wouldn't put this at the feet of the spokesperson. This is the logistics.
No, I think
array.
he definitely didn't. He's not going around the bases and saying, "Do they have this? Do they not have this?" Right?
No, that's not his job.
Right. The fact that they sent him out there to say that, though, caused so much damage when it came to people wanting to help, because people would say, "Listen, we trust the IDF 100%," and the spokesperson said there are no shortages. So therefore, we're going with what the spokesperson said, as opposed to you. What do you know? Right?
Yeah.
And that conflict was so challenging, because you're sitting there saying, I support 99.9% of what is being said, but this little percent was just not true. And I'm curious how, that's why I was asking about the information flow, because sometimes it's hard to understand, especially to the consumer who cares a lot. I'm not talking about the enemies who are sitting there trying to pick apart and disprove all sorts of radical theories, like silly
genocide.
website. I won't. Yeah, exactly. I'm not even going to talk about that. Yeah. I'm saying that from the inside. So, are those briefings directed towards Israelis, or are they directed toward the outside?
Well, you could see based on the language. When he speaks in Hebrew, the target audience is obviously the domestic audience, and then he switches to English and addresses international audiences and international media. But I think a very important point, he's done, I don't know, a few hundred briefings, if not more than that, where he's been the only one in Israel answering questions for many, many, many months. And I think we can cut him and many in the military some slack, because standing up and answering questions is a basic requisite that I think, or expectation that I have of politicians and elected officials. And I expect them to be there and answer tough questions, even when they don't have anything fancy to brag about, even when we're not killing Ismail Haniya in Tehran, and even when we're not killing, what's his name? Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut, or Yahya Sinwar. And I expect leaders to be there in front of the camera and answer tough questions in Hebrew by Israeli media. And I haven't seen that. And then,
also, I'll give you a very, very strong backing behind the spokesperson's unit, from the perspective that, like you said, accountability. There's also, when it comes to accountability, you have brigadier generals and other people who are walking around. They have drivers, big pensions, etc. They're supposed to be responsible for logistics or whatever it might be. And they might give a sentence or two to a news outlet in print, but they don't have the courage to stand up there and actually take responsibility for some of the failures and the extra stress that's been added. And I believe that they do need to be accountable. So it's kind of like the White House. It's the White House press spokesperson, right? Hagari was sent out there with information that was clearly false, and I want to know who gave it to him. I want to know who made this claim and why did they say that? And then you can start investigating. I think that gets to that will help understand some of these things. And like you said, the lack of courage is crazy. They're very happy to go out there, like you said, and show, oh my God, look, we just got a donation. Our purchase of D9 bulldozers just showed up. Here's the photo. Here's great. Look at us. This is our strength. But when it comes to holes, which are inevitable when you don't anticipate a conflict like this, nope, nothing. We're just going to send the spokesperson out there, and he's going to have to speak for it. So yeah, I don't think that it's fair.
Yeah, and I think that, the issue, there are many things that need to be investigated in the military and in the defense establishment and in the political echelons. But the shortage of equipment, the malfunctioning equipment, and the outdated and not up to standards equipment, all of that should be part of a national board of inquiry. I mean, when I look at the situation, and I've seen, I've gotten a lot of requests and people have asked me, and I've seen the amount of equipment that has been delivered to Israeli soldiers, reservists and regular units all across the IDF, then this really should be a wake-up call. And I hope that this will be investigated, and I hope that there will be, real accountability, and that the commanders and officers, and it's not only the logistic officers, we can't, put all the blame on them. This is a command responsibility. When I was a company commander, it was in infantry, it was my responsibility to make sure that my soldiers had everything they needed in order to be fit and ready for combat. And if they didn't have it, then that was my problem. It was also the logistics officer's problem, and I would give him hell for it, but it was, at the end of the day, my problem as a commander. And I think what we've seen in the IDF is a serious lapse when it comes to that, and we're still waiting for the after-action reviews to be finalized and presented. That's supposed to happen. What?
There's so many things to unpack there. I'll add, I was talking to a bereaved family 2 days ago, and I knew that their son did not have safe equipment on, that he was still in training and was tragically killed in bad equipment. And they said, do you think that he would have survived? And my answer was, God forbid, I would never tell you definitively an answer to that question. But what I can tell you is that if we had helped him and if he'd had safer equipment, would he potentially have a better chance of surviving? The answer to that is certainly yes. And that the difference in percentage of likelihood is really hard to reconcile, and it's hard to understand, but that's, and it's painful. When you talk about investigation, there's been a lot of political back and forth about investigations, which to many outsiders, they can't even believe it's political.